question of identity is really at the bottom of the issue. Because, Christy, you used a term that I personally consider the essence of American society and economy, and that is dynamism. Dynamism is an essential feature of American history and culture, and it does not only pertain to how America was shaped as a country, but also how it lives its identity. There is a very strong core idea of what it means to be American and what it means to become American, but at the same time, there is also a lot of negotiating and changing and moving up, and that's a very different story in Europe.
Wonderful. Again, as Gary has mentioned, the discussion will be in English with traces of German, perhaps. Thank you again to the two speakers. I think you have given us the scope in its entirety. What the topic of immigration consists of. Economic issues, cultural issues, political issues, and so on. And in our panel discussion for the next 30 minutes or so, we will try to dig deeper into these issues. First of all, I'd like to welcome the two new members to the panel. On my near left, we have Claudia Franziska Brühwiler. She's a professor for American political thinking or political thought and culture at the University of St. Gallen. And to my far left, we have Konrad Hummler. You know him. He's an entrepreneur, a publicist, and a member of the board of the Progress Foundation. I would like to ask each of you, just for 2 to 3 minutes, your initial reaction, your initial thoughts on what you have heard from the two speakers. Claudia first, please.
It's morning again in America, and night casts its shadow over Europe. I was really struck by the different tonality of both of the speakers, and I think it showed how a question of identity is really at the bottom of the issue. Because, Christy, you used a term that I personally consider the essence of American society and economy, and that is dynamism. Dynamism is an essential feature of American history and culture, and it does not only pertain to how America was shaped as a country, but also how it lives its identity. There is a very strong core idea of what it means to be American and what it means to become American, but at the same time, there is also a lot of negotiating and changing and moving up, and that's a very different story in Europe. You said very rightly that the American identity is the identity of immigration. That was not always a peaceful idea of immigration. There was a history of massive racism against Irish, Polish, Italian, and all these other filthy Catholic immigrants, as well as against the Chinese who made the successes of California possible, etc. But there was a renegotiating of what being American can be. And you already have that in your founding documents. Being American as being entitled to the pursuit of happiness. America as a country that strives for a more perfect union. So this dynamism is really ingrained. Whereas most European states have a different idea of what it means to belong. And I think that the phrase of belonging has not really been stressed enough, because you brushed lightly over the case of Japan that is now opening up under demographic pressure to immigrants and does see the economic case. But the question whether people who will then come as migrants to Japan will ever belong is a very different matter. And I think America makes it so easy to belong because it is constantly renegotiating while still holding strong to a core. We do not have in the United States strange discussions whether children should shake the hands of their teacher, whether that is negotiable or not, whether children should be forced to attend swimming lessons or not. We don't have these discussions in the US, but we have them very much so in Europe, where we have a hard time figuring out what we demand of those that want to belong, or that at least state that they want to belong. And I think there we come to the night time of the talks. At certain moments, I felt I was not listening to the author of Sokolov's Universe, but to the author of Submission, Soumission, Unterwerfung, as you were outlining what Europe might amount to. But I felt there was a very strong truth in what you were bringing to life, in how Europe has lost, most European countries have lost an idea of what they want people to be and what they see as the essence of being a member of their state. We have lost a bit a sense of what being part of our polities, of our societies actually means. We've lost that in a way that we have lost sense of what our values actually are and what the core of these values are. And I think there is a profound difference in the American case and in the European case, where we suddenly negotiate about swimming lessons and all those things, when we could say, well, this is absolutely beside the point. Of course you can have a Christmas tree in a school building. Of course you can have a discussion about what Christmas is about, etc. That's part of our core, but we are losing a sense of what that is. And I think there is also, and then I'll finish, a class dimension that hasn't really been brought out here, but you have touched on it when you were talking about the parts of the Dutch society that is particularly faced with large density of migrants. This is not usually people like us here that then have to negotiate what it means to be Dutch, what it means to be European. It's usually people who are seeing migration as a threat and who are perceiving their livelihoods challenged, whereas our class, the Anywheres, the laptop class, etc., can stress the economic case, can stress the big success stories. And you said in the very beginning, Christy, you had this phrase that had me hooked. We know how to address public fears, but we don't. At least in Europe, and I think the last election had also shown it in the United States, we have not found the language. And there is a level of speechlessness, I think in all Western societies, where we are denying ourselves to have very important discussions of what it means to belong. We have denied ourselves the vocabulary to address these problems.
Thank you. Slightly longer than 2 to 3 minutes.
Sorry.
Conrad,
Well, I tried to be short, and I was, of course, impressed by actually both speeches, and first identified myself quite a bit with the American speaker, because I thought, well, Switzerland in a way had been a little bit like that, because basically I believe that we had, and we still perhaps have, a success story of immigration in Switzerland. I mean, integration in Switzerland actually worked very well, because we have the highest amount, the highest percentage of immigrants whatsoever in Europe. So, I mean, let's face that, we are perhaps between 35 and 40% immigrants here in Zurich and wherever. So this is actually a success story, and then I asked myself, why has it been a success story? And very probably it was a success story. That's my feeling, because Switzerland has a kind of a identity which works. It's not an identity by race, but it's an identity by idea, by thoughts, by values. Anyway, then I came to the conclusion, but we have also the problem which Leon de Winter actually described, very much, of course, that somehow we feel uneasy with immigration, and that has started since a long time. But basically, we have, that's my view, we have a double complexity in Switzerland, which Europe actually doesn't have, but we have a double, because we have the welfare differential between the surrounding countries, Europe, and ourselves. I mean, 30% richer, you know, that gives a pressure of immigration, a natural pressure of immigration, which comes then to a quantitative problem, clearly. And we have a second that makes it, of course, as complex as in Europe. We have a kind of immigration which is a qualitative problem because of the mainly Muslim immigrants, which also come in numbers which are perhaps somewhat too high. So, in a way, yes, we like to be as Americans in a way, and we manage to do that. But on the other side, we have a quantitative problem because the welfare differential, and we have also a qualitative problem which Europe has because of the Muslim immigration. So let's manage this. That's the question: how?
Christy, you have painted a positive picture of immigration. Immigration made America. And still today, you paint a positive picture. You've heard a rather dark picture of immigration in Europe. The question is there a gap, a fundamental gap, between the idea of immigration in America or North America and Europe that will never be bridged, that is just fundamentally different? And it's useless to try and compare or even learn from how the Americans are doing it, how we could do it better.
It's a good question. And, you know, I played my part well here in telling you how good immigration can be. That doesn't mean that a lot of the problems that are highlighted up here don't exist in America, and I think that it would be foolish for anyone to try to pretend that they don't. They very much do. Whether there is a bridge or whether the Americas will always be different than Europe is a question I can't answer, but I do think that it is a question that policy can answer, and I think it is a question that well-designed policy can answer. The question isn't why are we continuing with a lot of these narratives about belonging and why can't we get there? The question is really, why isn't anyone talking about this more poignantly? And I think that that is what we're trying to do in America in a better way. I think you made a joke about something being woke in your speech, I think, or I reframed it that way, that we're not allowed to say certain things.
Right.
I do think that that has been a really common trend when we talk about immigration, that we feel certain subjects are off the table. It's inappropriate to say that we should want migrants to become part of our social fabric, to talk about assimilation, to say that we should prioritize economic migrants over humanitarian migrants in some cases. Many people didn't want to say that out loud. Our last presidential election has turned a lot of that on its head. People are willing to talk about some of these issues, and it is the root of these questions and these issues that is going to develop the policy that I think will correct many of these ongoing feelings about belonging.
Now, Leon, whatever strikes me when I'm in the US is the second generation, or the first generation of immigrants that is born in the US. They think and feel American and feel accepted as American. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Europe, in most European countries, the second and even the third generation feels not Dutch or not German.
Correct.
And doesn't feel accepted as Dutch or German. Why is that? And is that basically just a fact that we have to accept?
Because, of course, our continent is completely different. The amazing original documents of the American Revolution we lack. I mean, how special is it that at a certain point in history, a certain moment, some people got together and they say, listen, we're going to create a founding document and we're going to talk about the pursuit of happiness. It's so absurd, it's so amazing, it's so impressive to start talking about the pursuit of happiness at that moment in history, because what is life? Life is just waiting for death. And suddenly you have guys that are talking about the pursuit of happiness. So this still echoes that kind of optimism, the kind of we are here to take control of our fate. In Europe, more complicated, modern Germany, how long does it exist? Sometime in the 19th century, Italy the same. We were not able, and it's clear that there was a necessity after the Second World War, this devastation, to cooperate, to work together, and in the first years, the economic community, it worked fine, and then suddenly our bureaucrats took control of the whole process. And instead of creating moving documents, bureaucrats came together and created our constitution, which is completely unreadable bureaucratic stuff of over 400 pages. And instead of broadcasting the meetings in Brussels about how are we going to shape our lives, how are we going to shape this union, nothing happened. And the language, I've compared a couple of various language versions of our constitution. They're all a little bit different, because differences arise when you're going to translate. So there's also not a constituting document, which should have been, and please laugh, should have been in Latin. Then you create a direction. Then I know something about history, about the lines and the roots on which we have built Europe. Nothing of this. There is no original European constitution. It only exists in translation. It's totally absurd. And that means there never came a European identity, the European soul. Everything is bureaucratic. Who is moved by our European flag?
But allow me to interrupt. I didn't ask that how people feel European. I asked, why don't immigrants feel Dutch? Why don't they feel German or Swiss?
Because we cannot explain. Because we are totally perplexed by our own schizophrenic position. Are we Dutch? Can we talk about Dutch? Can we be patriotic after the Second World War? We made such terrible mistakes. And then we have suddenly Europe, and we are part of a new union for which we don't have any emotion. There's nothing connected to it. So we're completely lost in all kinds of instances. And in come people with a very strong cultural, religious identity. And what do we expect? What do we expect? What can we tell these people? Like in the US, this amazing, the biggest experiment in human history. What can we offer apart from, which is important, a welfare state? But how does this balance a welfare state and an immigration state? So it becomes very abstract and practical. And we are way more than just practical animals. We also have values, and we want to connect, and we want to be part of communities. Doesn't need to be one single community. Of course, we all change in positions and roles all the time. So, what to say? I am a proud Dutchman. You know what we did in the 17th century? We conquered half the world. We're proud that our sons went on two ships. 1/3 survived. The other drowned or were killed in wars that we had, but we did it great, and we brought Dutch culture to Indonesia, what we now call Indonesia, and there they still have Dutch words. Isn't that great? It's difficult nowadays to be proud of your colonial past.
So, but basically, what you're saying, and maybe I'll address this question to Konrad. Basically, what you're saying that European nations, Germany for its history, the colonializers for their history, they have kind of a deep-seated feeling of guilt,
Yep.
which makes it impossible for them to deal with the challenge of immigration. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's still possible there to find the real stuff. Because, of course, this is relatively recent. The Europeans brought also a lot of good stuff. The Industrial Revolution was born there in Scotland and in England. We're all children of that revolution. And the United States brought it steps further. So I think it's still possible, also looking at culture. And of course, I underlined, our classical European music, which is also, I think, a gift to mankind, a gift to the world. So yeah, we can be proud of certain elements, but I'm not seeing our politicians, our leaders in Brussels. It would be great if Ursula von der Leyen would give a speech about her love for Mozart or Bach, but it doesn't happen.
Konrad, leaving Bach aside, obviously you would
No,
probably
never.
agree to all. But we've heard from all the speakers basically. Immigration obviously is an economic necessity. We've heard our reproduction rates. We see them. It's a fact. We can have our opinions about it. Why are our reproduction rates so low? But they are. So my question to you is, what would an economic, a liberal way of managing the challenge of immigration be for our European nations?
Well, I think at the beginning there should be an open discussion about migration questions and a real open discussion about migration. And then one should define the goals of a migration policy. And perhaps it would be maintaining the number of people in Switzerland. Maybe that is a possible, and that of course means that we need some immigration every year because of the production rate. And then the second question is, of course, behind this quantitative issue is the qualitative issue. Which immigration do we want? And there, just the cheap worker is not only the only possibility. You can also think of some other qualities of immigration, and then we would perhaps come to another solution or to other possibilities than just having the open borders to this continent with this welfare differential. But also have some ideas to have people from Asia and wherever, which integrate much better than those which we have sometimes. So I think we should talk about this and have an open discussion within our social society and not have this idea, oh, he's right-wing, he's racist, he's whatever. I mean, I'm so tired of this. This cannot lead to solutions. This can only lead to some silly political battles, and I think we should overcome that.
But what would a solution be? Paint us
perhaps we have a
solution.
chance, because of this initiative about 10 million. We have to discuss actually. And that's of course the charm of Switzerland, in that we have this kind of initiative, and then we have to talk about things which the technocrats never would like to talk about. That's the great thing about a really open political system. I mean, it's the second biggest experiment in history to bring a society together. United States the first and Switzerland the second. And there we have the referendum and the initiative. So we have this chance in the coming months and year.
So basically, maybe, we have a discussion in Switzerland to limit the population to 10 million, which obviously would mean a discussion how to manage and also limit immigration. Maybe just to switch over to the US for a little bit. Again, Christy painted a very positive picture of immigration in the US. However, the Republican Party of today is not the Republican Party it was 20 years ago.
Neither is the Democratic Party.
Yeah, good, fair point. However, I mentioned the Republican Party because a political platform of anti-immigration was not Reagan, was not the Bushes. So there has been a shift. Where I'm aiming at is, Claudia, would you still agree to the rather positive picture that Christy has painted, or would you say that in the American society something fundamentally has shifted as well, and we cannot speak about immigration in the US today the way we spoke about it over the last decades?
I think it's always a question about what you speak about when you speak about immigration, because one thing is the economic case, one thing is the case for innovation, etc. And it's the same issue with Switzerland when Konrad Hummler said Switzerland has a success story of integration. Yes, when we look at it economically, absolutely. But may I remind you, we a few years ago had a referendum where people said enough. It was then subsequently ignored by the political class, but there was also a disconnect in those making the economic case, seeing the benefits, and those seeing what they considered a downside, the problems of growing together, the problems of what it means to belong. And I think we have a very similar dynamic at place in the United States, in Germany, in France, probably in the Netherlands, where on the one hand, people see the bigger economic case. Farmers see that they need people who help them during the harvest time. They see that their Uber Eats, it comes usually with someone who has recently arrived, that their taxi or Uber driver is a recent migrant. But they also see that in certain regions, they feel left behind. They feel unseen. They see that their way of life and their values are questioned and are no longer aligned with what they consider the establishment or the elite. And so a lot of the resentment against migrants, I would argue, in the United States doesn't really have that much to do with migration and migrants as people per se, but a lot to do with dissatisfaction with the economic course that certain regions have taken and where people feel left behind. There is this beautiful book by a Berkeley anthropologist, Strangers in Their Own Land, that very much describes that disconnect, and you could basically replicate it to AfD voters in Germany who are also rallying behind the migration cause, but are actually much more torn about issues of belonging, of being seen, etc. So I do agree with Christy's optimism, because optimism is also very American. It's part of a more dynamic view of history. But I would argue that a lot of the issues that are underlying the migration debate are issues that we share.
Unfortunately, we already have to come to a close, fully aware, of course, that we have not solved the immigration challenge.
That's important.
However, I would in closing, I would first like to quote someone, and then I would like to hear a closing statement from each of you. And this is actually in German. Quote, Deutschland ist ein starkes Land. Das Motiv, mit dem wir an diese Dinge herangehen, muss sein, wir haben so vieles geschafft. Wir schaffen das. Thus spoke Angela Merkel almost exactly 10 years ago, on August 31st, 2015. Brief translation, Germany is a strong country. The motive with which we approach these things must be, we have achieved so much, we will also achieve this. Hearing these words again. 10 years later, it almost feels like it's ages ago. Looking at how also the immigration debate in Europe has evolved over this time. So in closing, what I would like to hear from each of you, Leon, I would like to hear your positive view of immigration in Europe. What makes you confident? And forgive me, Christy, I would like to hear a pessimistic view of immigration in the US. What worries you? And Conrad and Claudia, you can choose. You can choose to be optimist or pessimist. So you can choose the framing of your closing statement. Who would like to go first? Leon?
You want me to look for bright sides? Well, of course there are bright sides. We have compared to the years, we have a fateful position on the globe, very close to turbulent areas with populations that are still looking for new balances, for new directions. We are still coping with the implosion of huge empires, the Ottoman Empire that left the whole shit in North Africa and the Middle East to us. The Austrian Hamburg Empire that left some problems, legacies on the Balkan. And, so these echoes, I mean, they go on already for a century and maybe even still louder. What makes me hopeful? Well, you're talking about a nice guy from Afghanistan who drives an Uber. Within a very short time, there are driverless Ubers. Well, I made it as a joke, but still, I think it's a lot of. I visited a couple of weeks ago. Someone asked me to visit it was a big machine, about 3 meters by 6 meters, about 4 meters high, and that was a completely automized chef. This thing could cook, could create amazing meals. So, which is bad? I like to have Indian food and Thai food and whatever. This thing can make all that with exactly the same flavor. So it's automation. Yes, that is right. How can we live with? Because of course it's nice, it's good to live together, wherever you come from. I don't know.
So, your positive statement is robots and AI.
Robots. I love robots.
Christy.
Well, I want to take just a moment. I know that you portrayed many of the EU's founding documents as bureaucratic, but I would challenge you to maybe insert some of your own writer's wisdom into those and tell a better story about what it is to be from the Netherlands or what it is to be French. You very much have that capacity. You're a beautiful speaker. There are, of course, challenges to any migration that Germany, that many countries are going to have to grapple with. The US is certainly not, has not overcome many of those. It requires, in many cases, I think, engaging with, like Claudia was saying, a populace that feels incredibly disenchanted with migration. It requires convincing folks who don't care about GDP that the impact of migration is tangible for them. We have to connect with people and let them know how migrants impact their lives on a day-to-day basis. In America, we often hear stories about people saying, well, I don't support immigration. Oh, but my immigrant's okay. The guy that runs my store, he's a good immigrant. Mm-hmm. And we can thank many of those immigrants for coming up with driverless cars and AI, for which I am incredibly grateful. I look forward to the chef. But to say that these challenges are insurmountable is giving up, and I think it is, it's not fair to assume that the bright minds of all of our many nations cannot come up with the kinds of policy solutions that we need when we have come up with the policy solutions that have overcome some of the biggest hurdles globally in the past. I refuse to say in this moment, where I am required to be pessimistic, that there is no solution here. We have to work at it.
Thank you. And Konrad and Claudia, in the interest of time, Gary is looking at me.
Oh.
Short, please.
Yes, very short. I like the idea of Latin in Europe. You know, Europe worked really well as long as they had the Latin language. And interestingly enough, Johann Sebastian Bach came to the same conclusion when he was 60 years old, that he decided to compose a Latin mass, you know, in Latin, because he always composed, of course, things for the German language. But at the end of his life, he came to the conclusion and did something which is really, I mean, one of the most outstanding works in musical history in Latin. Thank you very much for that.
You've done it. You figured out a solution.
Claudia, you have the last word.
Yeah, I can make 2 sentences. One is my favorite Latin saying, per aspera ad astra. I think that will work for immigration policy too. And secondly, it will always be morning in America, but Europe has to wake up too.
Ah,
Yeah.
Wonderful.
beautiful.
Thank you so much. Before I hand over to Gary, just again, please join me in thanking Claudia Franziska Brühwiler, Leon de Winter, Christy de Peña, and Konrad Hummler. Thank you very much.
Ja, Sie haben sich jetzt den Apero wirklich verdient, aber bevor ich Sie in den Apero einen Stock höher entlasse, habe ich noch eine kleine Überraschung für Sie, ein Paltis. Wie gesagt, unsere Stiftung hat den Ursprung in den USA. Wir haben seit je US-Amerikaner im Stiftungsrat und verfolgen, was in den USA passiert, vielleicht mit noch mehr Aufmerksamkeit als angesichts der Bedeutung des Landes ohnehin. Meine Kollegen Konrad Hummler und Ivan Adamovic hat es in den letzten Wochen, ich würde sagen, wieder einmal so richtig gepackt. Und sie haben unter Hochdruck einen anregenden, originellen, für manche auch provokativen Essay geschrieben vom Umgang mit Amerika. Und die zentrale These lautet, es könnte ja sein, dass Trump im Gegensatz zu dem, was wir hier in den Medien zu lesen und zu hören bekommen, kein Irrer, kein Tor, kein Dummkopf ist, sondern dass hinter all dieser Unberechenbarkeit, der Disruption, dem unanständigen Umgang mit Freunden doch so etwas wie eine Strategie steckt, nämlich der bewusste Abschied der USA von ihrer Rolle als Hegemon. Aber lesen Sie selbst, ich bin mir sicher, dass Sie es nicht bereuen werden, selbst wenn Sie die Überlegungen nicht teilen. Meine Assistentin Ida Waltensbühl und ihre Helferinnen halten am Ausgang ein Exemplar für Sie bereit. Jetzt für die Gönnerinnen und Gönner unter Ihnen ist das Buch natürlich gratis, denn denen, die heute nicht anwesend sind, werden wir die Schrift später per Post zustellen. Und was machen jetzt jene unter Ihnen, die noch nicht zu unserem Förderkreis zählen? Nun, Sie haben 2 gute, eine mittlere und 2 weniger gute Möglichkeiten. Die guten sind, Sie können ganz neu mittels Twint unten am Desk den Jahresbeitrag einzahlen und dann ohne schlechtes Gewissen ein Exemplar mitnehmen. Oder Sie können das Exemplar gegen eine Schutzgebühr von 10 Franken mitnehmen. sich die Mitgliedschaft nochmals gut überlegen und dann morgen statt 250 Franken nur 240 Franken einzahlen. Das verstehen wir. Die mittlere wäre, dass Sie kein Exemplar mitnehmen, sondern die Studie integral auf unserer Website konsumieren. Und die zwei weniger guten sind, Sie zahlen 10 Franken, können sich aber trotz mehrmaligen Überschlafens immer noch nicht zu einer regelmäßigen Unterstützung unserer Stiftung durchringen. Das verstehen wir eigentlich fast nicht. Oder Sie lassen sich das Buch in die Hand drücken und vergessen auf eine Gegenleistung. Das würden wir gar nicht verstehen, aber der Konjunktiv deutet es an, solche Leute gibt es in unserem Publikum nicht. Dann ein kurzer Rückblick. Im Februar führten wir sehr spontan den Anlass, was uns Ludwig Erhard heute zu sagen hat, durch, mit den Rednern Stefan Kolev und Georg Famberg und mit Josef Ackermann als engagiertem Panel-Teilnehmer. Dann ist auch seit unserer letzten regulären Economic Conference das reich bebilderte Buch Ringen um Freiheit, Liberalismus in der Schweiz von René Lüchinger, Peter Schürmann und mir erschienen. Mein Beitrag ist ein längerer Essay über Gegenwart und Zukunft des Liberalismus. Die Sonderausgabe für die Progress Foundation Gemeinde ist leider vergriffen, aber die Fassung für den Buchhandel ist noch erhältlich und eignet sich bestens als Geschenk, um liberales Gedankengut unter die Leute zu bringen. Denken Sie dabei bitte nicht nur an die Jungen, denn auch bei unserer Generation herrscht liberale Verkümmerung. Einige Exemplare liegen zu einem ermäßigten Preis unten auf. Dann die 60. Economic Conference im Herbst wird voraussichtlich dem Thema Cutting Bureaucracy gewidmet sein. Voraussichtlich sage ich deshalb, weil das vom Zampano in den USA vorgegebene Tempo die Themenwahl manchmal schwierig macht. Selbstverständlich werden wir unsere Gönner und Förderer rechtzeitig schriftlich einladen. Danach, wenn noch Plätze frei sind, weitere Personen auf unserer Adressliste. Dann darf ich Sie erneut auf unsere Website www.progressfoundation.ch aufmerksam machen. Sie informiert unter anderem über Veröffentlichungen und Auftritte unserer Stiftungsräte und sie verweist auf Publikationen aus unserem Archiv, die sich auch zum Verständnis der Aktualität eignen. Und schließlich bleibt mir zu danken von meiner Seite den beiden Referenten Christi de Peña und Leon de Winter, Claudia Brühwiler und Konrad Hummler auf dem Podium und Moderator Marc Dietli, den vielen Kräften im Hintergrund, die für Organisation, Technik und Verköstigung sorgen, sowie vor allem Ihnen allen für Ihr Interesse, Ihr Wohlwollen, Ihre Unterstützung. Wir machen diese Veranstaltungen, weil wir auch an Ihrem Echo die Wertschätzung spüren. Und damit wünsche ich Ihnen jetzt anregende Gespräche beim Apéro Riche sowie danach eine gute, sichere Rückkehr an die Arbeit oder nach Hause. Und vergessen Sie unsere Publikation vom Umgang mit Amerika nicht. Vielen Dank, bis zum nächsten Mal.